Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Own Your Awkward. I am super excited today. I have my amazing good friend for a long time and the author, illustrator, the unicorn, creator of Phoebe and Her Unicorn, Dana Simpson. Dana, how are you?
I am very well, thank you.
Excellent. I'm so happy to have you here today. I've looked forward to this conversation.
I've looked forward to it too, and then I completely flaked on you the first time we tried to do this, but today I'm here.
That's okay. It's all about enjoying those awkward moments, you know?
I had another house guest that day, and I could only focus on one thing, I guess.
That's fair. We got to keep our area of focus. I'm like a puppy. It's like I can only see one thing, and as soon as I have a distraction, it's like, oh, I forgot what I was supposed to do.
Life is a series of soccer balls you're chasing around a field.
I love that. So, Dana, you have been busy. For the world to know, we went to high school together.
We did. We used to eat lunch together on the steps.
Yeah, we were the outside kids.
We were.
It was awesome.
In every sense.
Yeah, definitely. Those were some fun times. In a way that it took me a long time to look favorably back on my high school years. There were a lot of good things that I liked about it.
Yeah, my memories of hanging out with you in high school are all very happy. Not everything from high school is, but that was a good time.
Right. Yeah, same here. We had band together. We went on some road trips. It was pretty fun.
Yeah, we went camping that time.
Yeah. Also, you guys are sorry, guys. We're gonna go down just a rabbit hole. There's gonna be a lot of high school memories just interjected.
We've known each other a long time, and it's gonna show up in the conversation. It's how it's gonna be.
It is, but it's awesome. But we're here to talk about you and all the stuff you have going on. You've been very busy, which is exciting.
Yeah.
One of your books here, Phoebe and Her Unicorn, but I'm sure that all of you know there are many books and comics series in the paper and all sorts of stuff.
Yes, my Phoebe and Her Unicorn is syndicated. It appears in a couple hundred newspapers every day. And there are now 15 books, and you can get them wherever there are books. And that's as much as I'm going to plug.
Right, that's fair.
We got stuff to talk about.
We got stuff. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm really excited for all of your success. So it's cool. But yeah. So what's the most exciting thing you see going on in the world right now? Most positive?
Kids. Like I don't have kids myself, but my job is very kid facing. I go and do schools and libraries and stuff, and I interact with kids, and the kids give me so much hope. Like, they are so much smarter than we were. I talk to them, and like they've read so many more things than I had read. They're so aware of the world and so progressive in a lot of ways. And it's like, okay, can we just give you the world now?
Right.
I'm very hopeful for the youngest people in our society and who they're going to become and where they're going to take the world.
I love that. I also really appreciate that you call out how much smarter they are than we were, because I talk to kids and they mention things culturally or geographically or historically, anything that I'm thinking, I know I did not know that at that age, and I don't even know if I knew it now.
Yeah, no, I've had those conversations with kids a lot too, and it's like, wow, maybe the internet wasn't a giant mistake.
Right. Well, I've always thought, well, maybe it was me. Maybe I thought I was smarter than I was.
If so, though, me too, because it's like I was considered one of the smart kids, and I feel like the average kid I interact with now is smarter.
Right. Well, that's a good point, though, with the internet. Kids have grown up with essentially an encyclopedia in their pocket.
Yeah.
Every volume of every encyclopedia ever in their pocket.
You know what that makes challenging for me? trying to correctly write a contemporary child, because my job is writing dialogue for a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And so I have to like, and I don't have any children. I have 7 nieces and nephews, and I've used them as a resource many times. It's like, do kids know about this thing? Or how does this thing in school work now? I bet it doesn't still work the same as it did 35 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like my fear is that I'll get too old and too distant from what the experience of being a child is like now to be able to do my job, but not so far. But I try and stay plugged in because kids are great and they deserve to be met where they are.
That's true. And they're gonna understand and relate to you better when you do meet them where they are.
I think so. I think kids appreciate when you're actually listening to them.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I tell you, I can relate to that idea of how do things even work now. A couple months ago, I did a workshop about change for the middle schoolers in the grade school that I went to. Going back into the same classroom that I had sixth grade in.
That's got to be a trip.
It was trippy. Things were in some ways very much the same, but completely different. The chalkboard is now a whiteboard. They had they have this built-in overhead projector that is attached to the laptop. All this stuff that theoretically I've seen all of these gadgets in business and in corporate life, and these are not technologies I hadn't heard, but to see them overlaid into the setting that you remember,
into a place that in your mind is frozen in time to like decades ago.
Exactly.
And now you've seen that it's moved on, but without you. It's honestly, it's kind of one of the reasons I don't live in Washington anymore. Because I still love the place I grew up. I lived there till I was almost 40, but by the end, it sort of felt like I was a little tired of seeing things that I remembered clearly from my childhood in a contemporary context.
Oh, that's fair.
It's sort of jarring in sort of that same way, like, oh, that's the thing from my childhood. Oh, but now it's been updated. And I don't know, I still like visiting home and stuff, but I like being someplace that I don't have decades of memories attached to for progress to disturb.
Yeah, it's just all new. I love that.
It's a new adventure.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting perspective because I have never lived anywhere else. I've visited other places, but I've wondered sometimes how that would feel to be in a place that is not where I'm from.
I've lived in California for 6 years now, and now I'm starting to have memories attached to stuff here. It's like, oh yeah, when I first moved here, this was that, and now it's this. Like,
I know. I
felt like again in 5 years.
Well, I just felt like I just missed you because you were living up here, and the whole time that I was married and I was not active on any social media, so I didn't stay connected with anybody. Completely my fault for that.
And I'm a little hard to find because I changed my first name 20 years ago. So
well, that was so then as soon as I started reconnecting with everybody, it's like Dana just moved, like just last year. It's like,
yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. No, it was like that with a couple people too. It was like, we just reconnected and now I'm leaving. Yeah. My spouse got a job at the university down here.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah, before that, they worked at University of Washington. They've got a sort of niche doing IT work for colleges.
Okay.
Which is cool. And we get to be in college towns a lot.
Yeah, that's got to be fun too, especially with all the art scene and stuff.
Yeah, there's always stuff going on.
So Dana, the world wants to know. We'll bring everybody on here to ask them, what's that awkward thing you've had to own to live your best life?
Oh my gosh, there've been so many. I feel like picking one is hard, but there is one big obvious one. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that I am transgender, right, for those who don't know how to complete the word, although I think that's fewer and fewer people. When I first came out as trans, people were like, what? And now I feel like people have some sense of basically what that means. I was assigned one gender at birth and now live my life as the other one.
Yeah.
And that I always knew. Not every trans person does. Some people wake up when they're 40 and are like, oh, that's what has to change. And that's valid too. But for me, I just always, from the time I was a little kid, I felt like it was a big cosmic joke on me that, oh, I feel like this is wrong. I feel like I'd make so much more sense as a girl. But at the time, there was like no people in the media did not talk about being trans, or if they did, it was just a punchline. I didn't know any trans people. Felt like it felt like a secret I was just going to have to sit on my whole life, and that takes a toll on you.
Yeah.
Having to live with something you think you could just never tell anybody. And the few times I did attempt to tell somebody, they'd be like, well, sucks to be you, because gender is not something you can really change. And so I thought I was just going to have to live with it until one day in my 20s, I kind of went, I'm not living with this anymore. If this is something you can change, I'm going to change it. And by that point, I feel like I had sort of tried everything else. I had, I was with my current spouse at the time. Like, we've been together since we were in our early 20s. I had found love. I had found my passion for cartooning. I wasn't getting paid a lot yet, but I was doing it. I'd found the thing that makes me happy to do. And I still wasn't happy. I went to grad school for a while. I moved away from Washington for the first time. I lived with my spouse in Ann Arbor, Michigan for a while during this time. And I was like flailing. I felt like I was like I'm trying everything. And then one day there was like a voice in my head that was like, you know what the problem is. But you've always known what the problem is. And there are people that have addressed this problem. Like, I didn't know any trans people, or I thought I didn't. It turned out one of my friends was and had just never told me. And then she was like, oh, I'll help you. And she was great.
Nice. You have to have somebody to on your whatever journey you're on. It's so helpful to have someone who has been down part of that road to just guide you in the right direction or get you towards resources.
Yeah. And it just knowing when Rachel was like, oh, I'm also trans. I was like, you are? I've known you for like 2 years and it never came out. But she was like, let me help you. And she she took me shopping. We had long conversations about it. She ended up recommending both my therapist and eventually my surgeon. She was the best. And it made me feel a lot less awkward having somebody else to do it with, because nobody else in my life had any idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I feel so much less awkward as a girl. Like, I feel like I move through the world in a way that makes more sense to me now.
Yeah.
It was the big, funny, awkward thing. People used to make fun of how effeminate my mannerisms were. Like, I remember being in a bar in grad school with some of my friends, and we're playing darts. And somebody noticed the way I would like sort of kick my back leg up when I would throw a dart. Everybody in the group thought this was the funniest thing ever. Wow, look at you throw darts like a girl. Well, yeah.
You're like, I am a girl.
I'm a girl.
No one knows yet.
Now nobody questions it. Nobody's like, you have really effeminate hand gestures.
Right.
It's not weird to people now. Being a guy with effeminate mannerisms would be fine, but the whole problem was that I never felt like a guy. Yeah. And I feel much, much less awkward in the world now that everyone acknowledges that.
Right. And that's one of the tricky things too, is like you call out that, being a guy with effeminate mannerisms doesn't mean that you necessarily feel like a woman or that you need to transition. And that's where I think it gets really tricky for people too, because people want to peg everybody with a label and say, oh, well, if you're this, then you should go over here, you should be that. But yeah, that's not necessarily the case.
But also sometimes people would be like, oh, why isn't just being an effeminate guy enough for you? Well, because it's not.
Yeah.
Because that isn't, because I am who I am, and there's no like secret other box you could fit me into.
Right.
This is who I am. This is what makes sense to me. And something I heard from a lot of people, most obviously my parents, but a whole lot of other people, was that like they were skeptical at first, but when they saw how much happier and more natural I seemed, it was like, oh, I get why that was something you needed to do. Look at you now. You feel so much more comfortable in your body.
Mm-hmm. I constantly encounter people, and I've been in that situation where we make all these small changes, like you mentioned, going to different schools, chasing all the stuff that you think is making you happy, and then it's still not enough, and it's because we don't make the big change that we need to make.
You're sort of avoiding it. You're hoping that if you make enough small changes, you might never have to.
Yeah.
And then one day, I just got to a point where I had tried everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you remember when you really started to first tell people and like knew that you were going to make this change? Like, how was that in that moment where you had to call mom and dad or call someone close and say, I'm going to be someone that you are going to see differently?
First person I had to tell was my now spouse, and we were uh, we were at an outdoor festival in Ann Arbor that day, and I realized while we were walking around this festival, and I was sort of people watching and looking at the guys and the girls, and the voice in my head is like, "Who are you kidding? You know which one of these things you are." And I was like, good God, I do. And having had that thought, I couldn't put it away. I knew as soon as I let it into the front part of my brain that this was going to change everything. And the first person I had to tell was my spouse. And I thought about it inside my own head all day. And then on the drive back to our house, our apartment at the time, I told them. And they were still using he, him pronouns at the time. And so was I. And I felt a little like I had just dropped a bomb into our relationship.
Mm.
And it was hard. Their initial reaction was pretty negative. It was sort of like they don't really like when I talk about it. And so I want to emphasize that after that, they were terrific and they've always been super supportive. But on that first day, it was kind of like, you're going to do that to our relationship? What if you change so much that our relationship doesn't work anymore? And I was like, I don't know, I hope not. But I couldn't promise that because I didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
That was really awkward. And I've heard other people say, like, oh, yeah, transitioning destroyed my marriage or whatever. I bet it does a lot of the time. I didn't know that it wasn't. It eventually just made us stronger and allowed them to confront some issues they'd been avoiding too. But that was all in the future, and we didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, that's in that moment you don't know where the road's going to go, but you know you need to make a turn.
Yeah, and they were sort of like, but I kind of like the way things are now.
Sure.
And we'd moved in together about a year earlier. Um, our relationship was finding its feet. So funny now we've been together forever. We're like one of those old married couples. These were the early days.
Well, it really shows how strong your love and relationship is that you could go through whatever and be even stronger.
Yeah. And now it's just a thing we went through. It's a journey we went on together. And
I love that.
I think if you love each other, it tends to find a way. I was lucky. I met the person I always feel weird using this language, but the person I was supposed to be with, I met when we were like 19, which was just and online. We lived in different states.
Oh, wow.
This was back when meeting people online was disreputable.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
90s.
It wasn't like now where everyone's got the app on their phone.
Yeah, we're like one in two couples met online.
Yeah, and everybody's rolling their eyes like, oh, we'll see.
Yeah, another couple that met online, but like back then it was disreputable and my parents were not crazy about it. Speaking of my parents,
yeah,
I had to tell them. And the parent that I talked to is my mom. My dad and I like each other fine, but dad's not a talker.
Okay.
Like so many men of that generation.
Sure.
And I wanted to tell her in person. So I waited until a few weeks later when I was in Washington and I was at their house. And I was like, Mom, I have something I have to tell you. Can we go for a walk? And we
Mm.
went for a walk. And I just flat out told her, rip the Band-Aid off. And she was so obviously relieved
Oh, wow.
on a couple of levels. One, I think from the way that I had presented it to her, she thought I was going to tell her I had cancer.
Oh,
Like that. It was like, oh,
we're
is
not
that all?
dying.
You're not dying? Great. Okay. What was the thing again? But also she was like, there's always been this deep unhappiness in you that I could never touch.
Mm.
That's how she put it.
Wow.
And she was like, I'm so relieved to have a name for it. And so she was like, okay, so what are you going to do? One of her first questions was, are you going to have surgery? And I was like, yeah, probably, but not for a while. That's like deep into the process.
Like,
And
we're beginning here, right? Like, yeah.
we walked around Gig Harbor for like 2 hours just talking about this.
Wow.
And at the end of that conversation, she said to me, have you picked a name? Because obviously you can't keep calling yourself my old name, which I'm not going to say. And I was like, yeah, there's a few I'm thinking of, but what do you think? And she said, I like the name Dana for you.
Oh.
And I was like, and that was not one I'd been thinking about, but I was like, huh, yeah, I like that one.
I
And
love that.
yeah, so mom picked my first name twice.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. She picked both times. I love that. And it's like that's the ultimate acceptance right there of not just okay, we're gonna deal with this, or we're gonna, you know, we won't gripe about it or whatever, but to actually show up with supportive.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for them at first. They got my pronouns wrong for like the first year.
Hmm.
But everybody, including my sister, who I was worried about my sister because she's kind of religious, but
Hmm.
she was totally fine. And I've always just been Aunt Dana to her kids,
Yeah. Wow.
which yeah, it's been pretty great. I shortly after I like went full time, I was out at dinner with my family. It was Grandpa's 89th birthday party,
Mm.
and uh, we're sitting at this table in a restaurant, and someone, my dad was a dentist. He's retired now, but somebody who was a patient of his came in and was like, "Oh, hi!" And my dad was like, "Oh, this is my family. These are my kids." He introduced me by the correct name, and she was like, "Oh, I thought you had two boys and a girl." And without pausing, my dad goes, "No, I have two girls and a boy."
Oh,
And she's like, "Oh,
wow.
all right." And then she like leaves, and she's like, "Dad, that was awesome." And he looked at me and was like, "What? It's true."
Yeah, just shut it down. And the thing is, it doesn't need a lot of explanation. Like sometimes we feel like, oh, I need to go through well, it doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, that's kind of another thing that like people are always like, "Oh, how am I going to explain this to my kid?" It's one sentence.
Yeah.
It's actually not a complicated concept. Like on the occasions when I usually when I like go to schools, I don't talk about this because it's not really why I'm there.
Sure.
But there have been occasions when I do. Usually people are like, could you talk about this? We have a trans kid at the school. It might be helpful if you went into it.
Yeah.
And every time I've done that, the kids just nod like I told them my shoe size. Like,
Yeah.
you're a girl now. You used to be a boy. That's like it's such a simple concept. It's
Yeah.
only complicated if you make it complicated.
True. And like you said earlier, when we were growing up and in the 90s, there were not things on TV about anybody going through changes like this. There weren't even anything about people really being gay in a typical life where they're just living their life. It was always, like you said,
Yeah.
kind of that the crazy person on the show or the humor or whatever.
Oh, totally. There was always like the one episode of a sitcom where there's the gay character who's there for that one episode,
Right.
and they're there so all the other characters can be uncomfortable, but then decide by the end, oh, actually they're fine. And it's like a
Right.
huge growth moment for the main characters, and then the gay person vanishes and is never there again.
Hmm. Yeah, they had their one. Yeah, I think Golden Girls had an episode like that, and probably every show where it's just,
Yeah. I Third Rock from the Sun had an episode like that. Like Seinfeld had the that weird one where people think Jerry and George are gay.
oh
Like,
yes, I remember that one.
Yeah, not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right. Yeah. And it's because I'm not one who's overly offended by humor and stuff when it's not from a hateful place. Like I can laugh at anything and enjoy uh when things are not hateful,
Oh,
but
sure.
hard to get through where that is sometimes. But
But you start to notice you're never the main character after a while.
mm,
You start to notice that there's never anyone like you, or if there is, they're just there to service the personal growth of the straight people.
wow.
You start to notice after a while, do I people like me are not the focus of the story ever. And that is something that has changed. Like you can have gay or trans protagonists in something that's fairly mainstream now, and
Right.
certain people will yell about it, but those people yell about everything.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing is I think we sometimes have to remind ourselves that the loudest people are not the majority. They want to yell about something.
Yeah, you often do have to remind yourself of that.
Yeah.
I thought, I'm probably jinxing myself by saying this, but I thought honestly that when I fell into the career niche that I did, like I didn't necessarily set out to become a children's book author. That's just where I wound up. Like I cartoonist was my career ambition, and then I started drawing the strip about a kid and a unicorn because that's what I wanted to do. And also is what my publisher, I had a development contract, and it was what my publisher would agree to release of the ideas that I had.
Yeah.
And then I've been doing the strip for a couple of years, and was like, well, it's time to release a book. We're going to release this as part of our Comics for Kids line. And I was like, that makes sense. Kids like unicorns.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of found myself in this children's author niche, which is wonderful because I kind of like kids more than I do adults. And then I started thinking, but I'm a trans person. I'm a transgender woman in this niche.
Mm-hmm.
Some Christian parents group is going to get their knickers in a twist about this at some point. And I am going to come under public fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, no.
Good.
Like, there individual jerks will come at me once in a while
Yeah.
in the comment section or whatever. Somebody post a 1-star review on Amazon and throw a bunch of slurs at me, but like that's only happened a handful of times, and it's always just one lone jerk.
Yeah.
It's very rarely, well, up to this point, never like a concentrated push. I know that happens to some people, and I'm still worried my number will come up eventually, but so far it's like the world saw the existence of a trans woman writing for kids and went, yeah. And
Yeah. Like, why do we want to fight about that?
yeah, go ahead, come at the unicorn lady. See how that works out for you.
Right? Like, I've been through plenty. I can handle it.
I can handle it, and I don't think the world's going to be like, yeah, get her.
Yeah. I have really practiced reframing things. And one of the things I had somebody post some negative comments on it on something a while back, and it was small in the scale of things, but I just remember thinking, yes, I've made it. If the haters are coming for me, then I must be getting attention. That's kind of my way of being able to separate it from taking a personal attack.
You definitely, as a person, as a public facing person, as a somebody who has decided to become a public figure, that is something you have to get past. It's
Yeah.
gonna happen. And for me, it was sort of like even before transition, even before Phoebe, I was a web cartoonist before that. I used to do a strip called Ozy and Millie.
Mm-hmm.
And Ozy and Millie was online only, and it had an audience of I don't know how many people.
Let's just
You
say
know,
2 million.
yeah, there's several 90 million people. And
Right. Yeah, there you go. Even better.
it was enough that I attracted some haters.
Mm-hmm.
The people who seem to hate you in a way that I'm like, you hate me more than I am invested in anything.
Right.
Like, what did I ever do to you? And every once in a while, somebody comes along and just throws venom at you. Like, even when I probably only had a few dozen people reading me. I had one or two times that people would be like just vicious for no reason, and you sort of have to be like, I mean, it really hurt at first.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have to develop a thicker skin and be like, well, this is the price of God. Before that, in college, I worked for the newspaper, and I wrote a column once, and I got a letter to the editor. I was the opinions editor, so it was a letter to me about me. And I got this letter instructing me to kill myself for the good of humanity.
Oh my gosh, that is
And
horrible.
I was like, it was from someone I had met too. I mean, it wasn't a very big college.
Sure.
And I was sort of freaking out about this. And my staff advisor for the newspaper, who was also my journalism writing instructor, said, look, every columnist, including people like Dave Barry, gets these. If you're going to do this, you're gonna have to find a way to live with that.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. This is the price of being visible. Maybe I want to just go live in a cave. But
yeah,
it does actually get easier.
Mm-hmm.
So you sort of learn to tune it out, especially if a lot of other people are being nice.
Yeah. Now, do you remember, like as you were starting to show up as a woman more, do you remember how that felt, being in the room, presenting yourself the way you've always felt on the inside, and now it's on the outside? Was that awkward, or was that like, I'm home?
It was both. Okay. Like, there is a term that some trans people use, gender euphoria, which I guess is the opposite of gender dysphoria, where you get to be yourself for the first time, and there is an elation that goes with that. It's like, oh my God, I never thought that I could do this, and here I am. But the thing is, no one passes right away. I certainly didn't. Yeah. These days I do fine, but the first little bit I did not so well. And you'd go to the trouble, you'd put on makeup and girl clothes, which no one's good at first. Right. Like, you've never done it, you don't know what you're doing. And for a while, you're more awkward than you've ever been. And people do pick up on that. And there were the first few times I went out, like trying to present myself to the world that way and mostly failing. It was more awkward than anything else I'd ever experienced. There were moments that I was like, maybe this is impossible. Mm-hmm. And that was hard. Those moments were hard. You go along, you get better at it. I think a lot of it ends up being confidence. Like, it's the whole thing where if you seem like you're supposed to be somewhere, if you seem like you're supposed to be doing something, most people will just accept you as you present yourself. Mm-hmm. And once you get over that awkwardness a little bit, people pick up on that new confidence and will just interact with you as you've presented yourself. The trouble is getting to that point. Yeah. Getting over that initial awkward hill. Right. Yeah. As you were describing it, I was just picturing almost reliving, teenage years where you're trying to come into your own. And there are all those moments where you don't quite know how to wear the adult clothes or all this different stuff, but now you're doing it as an adult on a whole new level. That is absolutely the way it is. It's many people describe transitioning as a second adolescence, a second puberty, and it really is right up to the fact that you have to chemically go through puberty again. Yeah. Because that's what hormone replacement is. You go through the other puberty. Yeah. And so, yeah, I've been through puberty twice. Yay. Yeah. And social adolescence twice, because you're absolutely right. It's learning how to wear the adult clothes and how to present yourself to people as an adult in this new way. And it really is, it's like being a teenager again for a while. And it's not that much fun when you're in your 20s or 30s. Right. Yeah, it's like, I thought we already did this. Why am I having to go through this again? I did my time. This sucked before. Why do I have to do it again?
Right. But when you know how, especially now, knowing how happy you are, like it's worth it, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, I think about me in my 20s going through all of this, and I want to time travel back there. And you see that those like memes on Twitter every once in a while. It's like, what 5 words would you say to younger you?
Oh,
And
sure.
I would just, yeah, I mean, that's not hard for me. I would just tell her it's all going to work out.
I love that. Yeah, I had a friend who's trans that I didn't know was trans till he told me. And I had a moment where they were upset that someone had outed them. And it was this eye-opening moment for me because as a gay person, the further you come from the change, the less you care about people knowing what you've been through. It's like, well,
Oh
they
yeah.
but I had to realize for them it's actually the opposite because they're in this new space and not wanting to be tied to an old identity. And it was an
That
opposite
is
way.
that is one way the two things are different. Like if you're gay, then you just are gay.
Yeah,
And it's about embracing that aspect of yourself. Whereas if you're transition, I mean, just think about the word. You're moving from one thing to another, and once you've arrived, nobody wants to be transitioning forever. You
right. Yeah.
sort of want to just get to the other side and then carry on with your life, or at least that's what I wanted, and I think that's common.
Hmm. Yeah, it's that's one thing that I think is dangerous in the LGBTQ umbrella of collaboration is that people think that because you identify with any one of those letters that you must understand all of the letters and it's like no, I've never had that experience. It's so I can't speak to other than through who I know.
Yeah, and we I think we're lumped together under that umbrella because we have a lot in common. Our interests often align,
Sure.
but there are in some other ways kind of fundamentally different experiences.
Yeah. I have been working on a joke. I haven't quite perfected it yet. Where someone asked me if I'm LGBTQ, and I'm like, well, 20%.
Yeah,
I'm like, huh? I'm like, well, I'm just the G.
and
But
I feel sometimes like people who are not any of those things do maybe not appreciate the subtle differences that exist within that umbrella, you
right,
know?
yeah, definitely. And yeah, I, it's fun. So yeah, so things have changed. Did you notice? I have to imagine that a lot of relationships changed through that. I mean, you talked about your mom being able to say, I knew there was something. I mean, I'm just guessing that that has brought a lot of things closer. You talked about your spouse relationship being closer. Uh,
Yeah, my mom and I have a different relationship than we did before too. Like when I was going through transition, my mom was like, "Here, let me show you all the stuff I would have shown you when you were 10 if I had known." Like we went shopping. Her taste in clothes is a little more conservative than mine, so I had to rebel against her a little bit.
again.
Again, speaking of going through adolescence again, and
Yeah.
she taught me how to do makeup, and she was like, here, let me do my best to help you in your womanhood. And my mom's family has a long history. Like she was really close to her mom,
Mm.
and her mom was really close to her mom. There's like this long history of mother-daughter friendships in my mom's family. And so feeling welcomed into that space it was one of the best things about it.
Yeah, I love that. And your mom is great. I have such fond memories of both your parents, but I just remember coming over to your house and your mom being so genuinely welcoming.
Oh, my mom is such a kind person. Like
Yeah.
I would love to be more like my mother because she's one of my favorite people.
Oh, it's good to have someone to strive towards that's positive.
And my parents have been so happy seeing me be happy and seeing me be successful. Like I know I was the kid they worried about for all sorts of reasons.
Right.
My brother's a doctor. My sister is a stay-at-home mother of 5, and I was the one who spent my 20s casting about and trying to figure my life out. And I know I was the one that they were like, but then everything worked out, and I can tell how happy they are about that.
Yeah. So how has this affected life outside of relationships and stuff? I mean, obviously you're very successful, but do you feel like you could have gotten to where you are if you hadn't have addressed this? Or
No, I think if I had never addressed it, definitely Phoebe and Her Unicorn could not exist. Because Phoebe is a statement I think probably only a woman could be making. Only somebody who has recognized themselves and maybe interacted with the world in that way. It's definitely, it's an expression of that side of me. I think Phoebe and Her Unicorn is an unabashedly feminine project. I'm running into this as a problem right now, because we're developing it as a show at Nickelodeon right now.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, don't congratulate me yet. There's the hurdle we've hit. It's the second time we've tried to develop it as a show. We were in development at Amazon Studios for 2 years before they dropped us and effectively canceled all their kids' TV programs they had at the time. And Nickelodeon there's been some executive changes there, and they're starting to be, the new executives are starting to be like, there aren't enough boys in this.
Oh, goodness.
Like, yeah, I'm like, there are some, it's not zero. If there was one girl, you'd think there were enough girls, but like,
yeah,
boys have to be, you know, boys are.
It's okay to appeal to different audiences and have different.
Yeah, there's this idea though that girls outgrow animation. It's like, maybe that's just because you're not making enough shows for them.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a friend who's a big TV animation figure, and as soon as it started happening, I was like, hey, you want to get lunch with me? And we just complained about this for like 2 hours.
Yeah, the overriding feeling.
Sitting in an Oceanside cafe going, yeah, Hollywood and men are the worst.
What is it with them?
Yeah, but I do, to get back to your original question, yeah, I do really think that Phoebe and Her Unicorn came out of me as who I allowed myself to become and couldn't have existed otherwise. In terms of how people how it's affected my career, and it's hard to say. I really don't know. I do kind of feel like they released my strip in spite of my being trans, not because of it. But also maybe being a woman has not been unhelpful. Like, I do kind of feel like okay, let's talk about the publishing industry for a second. People don't know this, I find, but most people who buy comics are girls under 15. People don't know this. Did you know I personally outsell Marvel?
Wow, I did not know that.
Marvel sells shockingly few actual comics. It's amazing. You know, they're this movie juggernaut, but in terms of selling actual comics, and Marvel actually doesn't sell all that many. And if you look at the top sellers of comics, first of all, manga, Japanese comics, that's its own whole category.
Okay.
They sell just a ton of comics.
Yeah.
In terms of non-manga comics, if you look at the list, it is all children's graphic novelists. Like 90%.
Wow.
People like Dave Pilkey, Captain Underpants, Dogman, Raina Telgemeier, who is great. But I don't need to tell anyone that. She outsells me like 3-1. I am actually, for the last year, I've seen data for the 8th best-selling non-manga comic artist in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, but people don't know that. It's like a big secret that girls are the main market for comics. Because people never acknowledge girls. people.
And yet we still have people saying that there's not enough boys in the comics that
Yeah.
girls are buying already.
Yeah. We're not getting the right audience, even though we have this massive one, because girls don't count. I do kind of feel like it's funny, you know, I always worried that transphobia would take me down. And now the problem I'm running into is garden variety sexism.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with trans. It's just
it's just women,
yeah,
girls.
wow.
And I don't want to complain because obviously I'm doing really well, but I do kind of feel like I'd get more awards and more recognition if my audience were not young and female. There's sort of this idea that you're not as serious if you're writing for that audience. It's not as serious an audience to be creating for. I don't have any hard evidence of that, so maybe I should say it less, but it's definitely something I feel.
Yeah, well, it's, vibes are a real thing. You pick them up, and it's always not always easy to find the evidence behind our intuition, but it's there for a reason.
I do think, though, that I may not get as much recognition from the men who, for some reason, get to decide who gets recognition, but I am everyone's niece's favorite author.
Of course. Yeah, which is I would imagine in a lot of ways so much more rewarding.
It's wonderful. It's super rewarding. And often I find that it's like I'll be at a convention and a family will come up to my table and the adults will be like, "Oh, honey, this looks like you might like it. What do you think?" And the girl will be like, "Yeah, I've read books 1 through 6. Can I get book 7?"
I love that. Well, I tell you, when we reconnected and I found out what you'd been up to, I ran to this. Well, I drove to the closest bookstore, and I'm like, okay, maybe they'll have a Phoebe and Her Unicorn book. And there's a whole section. I was like, holy
Yeah, it's gone very well for me.
And it was like an end cap display. I was like, wow. So I bought the first two, and I honestly thought, I don't know if I'm gonna be into the comic book scene. I'm buying them because this is my friend, and I want to see what it's like. But I opened it and I started reading the first Phoebe and Her Unicorn. I felt like I was hanging out with you in high school because it was just so much embodied that
Oh
way
yeah,
to interact and just kind of casual. Like it was cool.
that makes me really happy to hear. My mom, I'm talking about my mom a lot. Well, my mom is great. My mom always tells me she reads the strip every day, and she's like, "You really remember what it was like to be you as a child." Like,
Yeah.
Phoebe is a straight up self portrait.
Well, and yeah, and definitely the choice of words, the tone, I could hear it coming through, and it was bringing back really good memories.
Well,
And I read the first book overnight. I didn't put it down. I was like, this is fun. So
well, I'm really glad to hear that, and thank you. I'm glad that was your experience with it.
yeah,
I feel like I can really see you in this as a very high compliment to give an artist.
uh, well, and the thing is, yeah, that's fair because I think that we pour ourselves into our work, right? So
Oh, definitely.
it's but yeah, it was also amazing to me to think about how you could actually come up with all of the text in the way that you do, the way young kids are going to talk.
Yeah, and like I said, I always worry that kids will start talking in some different way that I won't be able to connect to, and that'll be it for me. My
Well,
stuff just become hopelessly dated.
well, if they just keep reading your books, they'll just keep talking like your books.
Yeah, maybe I'm in charge of this now. I never thought about it like that. I have power over how children talk.
Well, that's what I thought was interesting was when you were stating how maybe people don't take it as seriously when your audience is young, primarily female readers. It's no different than you're servicing an audience no different than a textbook industry would be writing for. You're providing them with insights and tools and all sorts of good stuff.
Something I always try to do too is I don't dumb down language at all for my audience. And people tell me that they like that. But like I enjoyed reading stuff that was a little above my head when I was growing up. I liked encountering words I didn't know,
Yeah.
getting to learn them and stuff. And so, I'll include big complicated words in Phoebe's stuff. And then we only started doing this in like book 4 or something, but there'll be like a glossary at the end. So if there's words words or concepts that you as a kid don't know, if you don't know what multiverse theory is, or what cubism is, or whatever, then it's there at the end, and now you know something you didn't before. And I always loved that stuff when I was young.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's like you get you sneak in the education along the way, kind of trick them into it.
Yeah, it's education's only boring if you suck at
it. True. Well, Dana, I could just talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but I know that that everybody has things to do, and we will talk more. But what would be the advice before we go? What would be the advice you would leave our listeners on how they could own their awkward?
You know what? This is going to be the tritest thing that I have said the entire conversation, but follow your heart. Like, I started to feel much less awkward when I stopped trying to be something that I wasn't. And I also found that for the most part, the world likes you more if you just own it. You may feel awkward, but you're never the only one.
I love that.
Be you, and your people will find you.
Definitely. That's beautiful. Well, Dana, thank you so much for everything you're doing in the world. You're a great role model for so many kids. The books are entertaining. Obviously, good friend. I'm so excited to be able to chat with you today. It's been a pleasure.
Andy, it's always a pleasure. Talking to you is a delight. It always has been.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody else, don't forget to share, subscribe. Make sure you read those Phoebe and Her Unicorn comics. Grab the books, and as always, own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.